Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Lord Paddy Ashdown, diplomata i političar iz Velike Britanije, koji je 90-ih bio čelnik liberalnih demokrata. Služio je u mornarici, te je bio obavještajac u britanskoj sigurnosnoj službi. Našem je dijelu Evrope poznat kao visoki predstavnik međunarodne zajednice u Bosni i Hercegovini, dakle, tijela koje nadgleda provođenje Dejtonskog mirovnog sporazuma i ima ovlašćenja konačnog autoriteta u zemlji. U Sarajevu je nazočio konferenciji povodom 20. godišnjice Dejtona.
Lord Ashdown, a warm welcome to our program. Now we meet in Sarajevo, and you're back to Bosnia and Herzegovina to mark 20 years after the Dayton Peace Agreement. We're going to talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina a lot more in later in program, but let us first refer to the humanitarian crisis Europe is facing for some time. As we speak, presumably thousands of people are fleeing their homes, primarily in Syria. They're trying to get away from war and destruction. And what do you feel about the response from the European Union and the rest of the continent? Are they, or are we doing the right thing to help those people?
They're trying to do the right thing. I mean, look, people will get impatient because the European Union isn't immediately able to solve a problem of 1 million refugees turning up suddenly on your doorstep. What country could possibly cope with that? So it's not elegant, it's not very neat, but how could it be? I think we fail to understand the scale of what is happening. By the way, in my view, this is the new normal. We are reverting to the age-old factor, geopolitical factor, of vast movements of people ahead of war, famine, pestilence. It's only the last 50 years we've been free of that, and I think when you see global warming taking effect, you'll see this continuing, and increasing much greater numbers. So we have to think about how we cope with a problem we haven't had to cope with before, and Europe is struggling to do that, but at least it's trying. Exclude, I'm afraid, the United Kingdom, whose attitude in this is morally indefensible and practically stupid.
Why so?
Well, because what the United Kingdom has said is we will not help those whose lives are threatened and indeed lost. Trying to get to Europe, we'll help those who are already safe and secure in the camps. That's ludicrous. It's morally indefensible that we're not prepared to come forward and support the rest of Europe in that. And secondly, the only way, I mean, we've got our own immigration problem, refugee problem, 30,000, only 30,000, 3,000. At the gates of the Channel Tunnel, that can only be solved within a European context. And for the United Kingdom to separate themselves from European common action on this is just in our own interest, stupid in my view. So some are doing better in Europe than others. I think Chancellor Merkel has shown almost unbelievable political leadership, put herself greatly at risk, done something which is humanitarianly necessary but also right. The other European countries, I think of Hungary, has been unacceptable in its response. But
what about the Balkans? What about the countries in the Balkans?
If you are a secure, developed country in the European Union, you're self-evidently better able to cope with this, although it's difficult enough, than countries on their way to that stability in the Balkans. So, of course, the reaction has been, probably in many people's views, inadequate in some Balkan countries. But who can be surprised given the scale of the problem? And if Europe, settled, developed, rich, stable, finds it difficult to cope with this, you know, so would Montenegro, so would Croatia, so would Macedonia, so would Serbia. We are learning the new policies that we will need for what is the new normal. And it'll take a bit of time to do that, but at least we're trying to get there.
You've mentioned German Chancellor Angela Merkel. And how do you see the role of Germany and Turkey? German Chancellor somehow offered Turkey money in exchange for help, for support to at least reduce numbers of people crossing to Western Europe. And do you see this will work? And she promised, as it was said, some other incentives for Ankara.
Look, Chancellor Merkel has taken an extremely brave political stance, extremely brave. I know of no other European leader who will do anything like that. She has placed her own future at risk. She is now subject to very considerable political domestic forces, of course she's going to reach out to try and create circumstances where that pressure is lessened. Who would not do that? I mean, the issue of Turkey is a very different one. I take a slightly apostate view about this. I mean, Turkey is a European nation, in my view, should be treated as such, but I think in Turkey's interest, I've said to my good Turkish friends for 15 years now, I don't believe Turkey's best interests are served by acting as beggars banging on the door of Europe pleading to come in. Turkey's position is much more important as a sort of fulcrum between the East and the West, capable of acting as a bridge. The position, by the way, which Germany profited from in the days of the Cold War. So if Turkey wants to come to Europe, I would welcome that, but I think it's in Turkey's interest to be part of, very close to Europe, a Europe friend, but to act in its own interest as a bridge between the world of Europe and the world of Islam. And that, I think, is a very good position for Turkey to be in.
And to stay out of the European Union, not being a member.
Look, my own view, if I was a Turkish, I don't deal with this in any way from a moral point of view. If Turkey wishes to come to Europe, Europe should accept them, and I would not have, I don't have any difficulty about that. But in my view, if I was a senior Turkish politician, I think at this stage I'd be saying, I believe my country's interests can be better served by adopting, of course, all those values and standards of Europe, which I hope they'll work their way towards, but for us to use this, as I call it, the fulcrum position to the advantage of Turkey. I mean, if you take a look around the Middle East, you take a look, for instance, at Libya, you take a look at Tunisia, take a look arguably at Egypt, you will find that many see a model of democracy that they would follow as an Islamic Republic model of democracy, which has much more resonance with Turkey than it has with, for instance, the conventional Western European political systems. And so I think Turkey's got a very, very important role to play. If I was thinking not of Europe's interest, but of Turkey's interest, I'd play the fulcrum role at this stage, which I think they're trying to do.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel recently said new conflict is possible in this part of Europe, the Western Balkans.
I wouldn't take it seriously, Saša. I really wouldn't take it seriously, and I don't. This is a domestic politician under considerable pressure for a very brave position. She's making an off-the-cuff, probably unthought-through comment to a domestic audience which was not intended for wider consumption. Now, if you're in the Balkans, of course, I fully understand. If Europe's greatest leader, its most important leader, its most powerful leader, and in my view, almost its only real leader, Angela Merkel makes a comment like that, all Balkan prick up. But I do think you are placing too much emphasis on what was probably not a comment that was meant to have all the meaning that you now load onto it.
But are we to blame for placing such an emphasis?
No, there's not. I mean, but you have to accept we are human beings, politicians. Sometimes we say things that are not meant to be heard outside the circle of the audience.
But it was public event.
Let's not worry too much about that. I merely say to you at this stage, do I see war coming to the Balkans? No. Do I see the dangerous position of the Balkans leading to war? No. Do I think that in these febrile circumstances, if there is an accident, that could lead to an unpleasant and even more unstable situation? Can I totally discount that possibility? For the first time in my life, not. And that's what worries me. And it worries me for two reasons. First, because Bosnia is becoming less integrated, less unifying. It's going in the wrong direction, not the direction of reintegration, but the opposite direction. And it is now living in an increasingly dangerous region. You know, 10 years ago, this was not a dangerous region.
Increasingly dangerous region.
Of course.
And yet there is no danger of war.
But you know, I didn't say there was no danger. I said it was not a likely or probable outcome from the present circumstance. I'm very careful to say there was no danger. I cannot discount that possibility. I can, however, say to you that what makes that happen is the combination of the lack of the reintegration, the lack of the continuation of the reintegration process in Bosnia, and the fact that if you take the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans, this is one of the world's hotspots. Now, it's bad enough to be unstable in a period where it's stability all around you. It's very dangerous indeed to be unstable where everybody else is unstable as well. And that's the danger of the present situation. You know, I don't believe war is likely. I don't believe it's probable. But I cannot say to you at present that by accident some chain of events could be put in place where there might be an outcome which was extremely unpleasant.
What chain of events?
I don't know.
You don't?
I mean, that's one of the things nobody knows, a chain of events that's unpredictable. I know you're trying to get headlines out of this, and I know why you're trying to take me in this direction, but you can't predict the future, neither can I. I mean, if I were to say to you, what will happen when you cross Farahadiya this tomorrow, could you be knocked down by a bus? Yes, you could. But I'm not going to tell you the circumstances in which that would happen. So all I'm saying is that the instability of Bosnia within an unstable region creates circumstances in which unpredictable things can happen. I think I say very clearly that war is not a prediction, it's not likely, it's not probable, but we live in uncertain times.
And it seems that Croatia and Serbia are buying new weapons here, where the USA and Russia are playing a key or major role in it. So the politicians in Bosnia and Herzegovina are voicing their concerns about that.
Yes, I would be if I was in their position too. I mean,
is it dangerous situation?
Do you mean, is it dangerous in an unstable region and infected by war for people to have more weapons? What do you think the answer to that is?
Yes.
Well, of course. Of course it is. Don't care where the weapons come from. One thing we do not need more of in this region is weapons. By the way, one of the problems with Bosnia is it's awash with weapons. This was Tito's arms factory, and there are still far too many, and you see Bosnian weapons being exported right across the globe into some of these trouble spots. That's a serious problem in itself. If I was living in a region where people were spending money on weapons rather on their people, on jobs, on health and education, would I get worried? Of course I would.
What should be done?
What should be done? Do you mean to say we should intervene?
If you're a Bosnian politician,
well,
and you have neighbors buying arms.
Saša, you would express your views about it. What do you think? Bosnia should take up arms and stop them having arms? I mean, come on. What do you think should be done? What's open to, what would the West do? Does the West have a right to stop a sovereign nation taking the actions it believes that are interested in the nation? No. Well, what are we going to do? Go to war about it? That'd be ridiculous. What would Bosnia do? Go to war with Serbia and Croatia to stop them doing this? I mean, it's a preposterous thing. They're doing what they're doing. They're expressing their concern. I would do the same thing.
Prime Minister of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, recently said he was in Moscow, and he said somebody is trying to destabilize this region. He didn't say who, but...
and he was in Moscow at the time.
He was in Moscow, but how dangerous is that situation?
Well, look, let me start off from saying this, that when I was High Representative here, I used to work on the principle that I could get very little done in Bosnia and Herzegovina unless I also involved Zagreb and Belgrade. And they played a very constructive hand in those days. I think President Vučić, Prime Minister Vučić's visit to Bosnia and Herzegovina was extremely constructive. And I think, in particular, his very clear statement that the policies currently being pursued by Republika Srpska are ones that Belgrade does not support. I think that's very important. So I'm not about to go around... Look, let me make this, however, clear. Russia, Mr. Putin is playing chess. And his chess is with the West. And so he'll move pawns about. Russia's not interested in the Balkans.
Not at all.
No, they're interested in the Balkans as a space in which they can make mischief for the West. But these are pawns. Bosnia is a tiny little pawn that's moved around. Does not indicate real interest from Russia. It merely indicates Russia's desire to make mischief for the West where it's able to do so. No more.
And what mischiefs can he do here?
Oh, come on. I'm sure you're clever enough to know that. If Russia's engaged with the West on a confrontation in Syria and in Ukraine, then obviously it's going to make other moves which can be put onto the chessboard and make their bargaining position better. You understand that perfectly well.
So what about Montenegro, about Podgorica? There were some violent protests recently took place in Podgorica, capital of Montenegro, and the Prime Minister said that Russia has its fingers there, should I say, in those protests.
Well, the Prime Minister is free to have his views. I don't have to share them. He has information which I don't have available to me. My view about Montenegro has always been that it's the influence of the Russian mafia in Montenegro, who have brought up large sections of the country that worry me. But no, the Montenegrin Prime Minister will say what he's going to say, but don't expect me necessarily to support it or even repeat it.
And what do you think about when you say Russian mafia? How deeply they are rooted there?
If you go to Montenegro, you know that there's a huge purchase of public assets by people who are at or close to the circles of mafia in Russia. By the way, it's not just Montenegro, it's also London. I mean, there's money coming into London now to purchase London property, which many of us believe may well have Russian mafia origins. So let's not pick out Montenegro as an exception to that. It's probably happening in Switzerland too.
Interesting. And back to Montenegro.
You go to Swiss ski resorts and see who's buying those massive Swiss ski properties, and you'll see what I mean.
Yeah, it seems that this part of Europe is in a more difficult situation than Switzerland. Of course, as you explained, Switzerland has some other means to resolve it. But let's get back to...
But you make my point exactly. You know, the phrase I used today, that I believe that Bosnia's destiny was to be part of Europe and could be part of Europe, and it would be one of the little jewels of Europe because of its beauty, because of the ability of its people, but also because this is Europe's most ancient Muslim population, who see very clearly, in the words of Ali Izetbegovic, that to be a Muslim and a European, there's nothing contradictory about that. We have a real role to play to act as a model of what can happen in this geopolitical context between Christendom and Islam. Very dangerous context. And if Bosnia was to become a valued means as a model to resolve that problem, that's intensely helpful. If, on the contrary, that external instability, that conflict, that geopolitical contention, is now imported into Bosnia, that's extremely dangerous. And that's a very interesting choice for Bosnia to make.
But Montenegro is waiting for the invitation from NATO to become a member, and they seem to be waiting for a long time and there is a sense they did everything right. But there is also a speculation that Russian intelligence has some influence in Montenegro's security structure.
Saša,
is it
you're living in the Balkans. The Balkans is the international home of conspiracy. You know, whatever happens in the Balkans, people always, oh, well, it's this conspiracy, that conspiracy. In the days of Britain's power, there used to be a phrase in the Middle East, no dog barks in the Middle East, but British intelligence is behind it. It certainly wasn't true then, it certainly isn't true now. I think people have all keep themselves awake at night with nightmares of conspiracies in Russia, in the Balkans, who knows whether they're right or wrong. I certainly don't.
But so many prime ministers, the men in power, leading nations, are talking about those things.
Well, they can talk about them, Saša, because they no doubt have the intelligence to support them. I don't.
You don't?
No, of course not.
Okay. Back to Bosnia and Herzegovina.
I mean, I will say this, and this is what's important. Never mind the conspiracies. Never mind the things you can't see and can only imagine. Never mind if they're right or they're wrong. 90% of them, by the way, are wrong. You only need to look at what's happening externally and publicly. Russia is playing a mischievous hand where it can do so. It will do so in any areas of instability which the West is interested. One of those is the Balkans. That is undoubtedly happening. Now, that's something which is real, which is happening. We can see it happening, and we should be aware of, not by promoting conflict with Moscow, but rather by promoting more stability in the Balkans. And that's what the crisis of Bosnia is all about. That's why the right thing to do now is to work towards creating a more stable Bosnia and Herzegovina, integrated and functional, and not to be starting at shadows in the dark of conspiracies that may or may not be happening. In my view, probably not.
But 10% of them may be true.
I didn't say 10% of them may be true. I said at least 90% are untrue. Why do you stick with that? I mean, why is there this wonderful Balkan obsession of dealing with shadows when the reality is good enough? Let's deal with that. We know what's happening in publicly. We know what we need to do. We know that the Russians are trying to create mischief. I don't necessarily blame them. That's their geopolitical interest to do so. We know what the right reaction to that is. It's not to have more contention with Russia. It's not to frighten ourselves to death by conspiracies that are almost certainly untrue. It is to play our hand to create a more stable Balkans.
And speaking about Bosnia and Herzegovina, you left the country in 2006. What do you see today in Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Well, it's a game of two halves, really, as we say about football in England. The first half, the first 10 years, I think, was remarkably successful. This country was a world leader. People said, I remember, Afghanistan came into operation. I was high rep. Somebody, the Americans, sent a delegation to Bosnia and said, how did they do it in Bosnia? We need to replicate that. in Afghanistan. They wouldn't do it now. And I think that two things have happened. The first is that the international community has become distracted. It has other problems to deal with. Bosnia is not at the top of those. It's lost interest to a certain extent. It's lost will. I think it needs to recreate that, or Bosnia will create circumstances which will mean they'll have to pay attention. It's much better to do that ahead of the event. And secondly, Bosnian politicians have lost the vision that more and more of them now are involving themselves in the politics of the entity, by and large the politics of division, rather than the politics of the state. This is not good for a nation that has to become functional to serve its citizens better. How can you possibly create a circumstance where you're spending money on the citizens you should do for houses and jobs and welfare and health when you're spending so much on 14 prime ministers and 14 governments? How can you do that? And then there's the second thing, unless they create a functional Bosnia, they cannot achieve the only destiny that gives them prosperity and security, which is to be part of the European Union and part of NATO. So we're going in the wrong direction.
And what is the role of the OHR today? And seems your successor is sort of having holiday in Bosnia and Herzegovina for...
I don't think he's having a holiday at all. I think it's very unfair. You know, you could have a high representative that descends from heaven, wreathed in cloud, clothed in golden raiments and equipped with thunderbolts to deliver. Unless he has the backing of the international community, unless he has the will of that behind him, which I did, nobody can achieve very much. I think he's done an extremely good job. The problem does not lie with the high representatives. The problem, I think, lies with those who ought to be providing the will to ensure that he can continue to do the work that needs to be done in Brussels and the European capitals and Washington as well. So look to them. Don't start criticizing the high representative.
So why they don't have that will? Why did they lose it?
Well, I've just explained to you. I mean, they've lost interest. Bosnia is not at the top of their agenda.
But should it be?
Well, of course it should be. That was the purpose of what I said today. What I said today, let me repeat it, is that I know you are distracted, but if you do not now pay attention and will and apply political will to Bosnia, then your investment here is at risk. So the whole purpose of my speech was to act as a warning to Bosnian politicians that they should not proceed on this basis because they will blight the future of their people, and a warning to the international community that if they think they're right to turn away and lose interest, then they're wrong. They better return and start doing some serious work here.
And about politicians here, do you think they will follow you? They will listen to you, especially those in Banja Luka. I haven't heard many nice words about you from Banja Luka, especially from the ruling party there.
If you do a job like I had to do, you're not going to get nice words from anybody. You can find good Bosniaks who wouldn't have nice words to say about me. For instance, when I refused to allow them to name Sarajevo Airport as Ali Izetbegovic Airport, despite the fact that I was very great friends with Ali Izetbegovic and was at his deathbed and at his funeral. So you have to act in ways that, you know, if what you want to do is be eternally popular, don't do a job like this. So I'm not concerned about that. I don't even know about it, don't pay any attention to it. And I think that's the right reaction.
How do you see the president of the RS, Mr. Dodik?
You know, my view when I was here was always that I judge people by what they do, not by what they call themselves or what they are, and that's the judgment I would hold to. And I think there's a danger of us getting too distracted by Mr. Dodik, not by what he does, but you know, his power is really weakening now. He's lost massively in the recent elections. And of course, he would have seen, as every other Bosnian would have known, that Mr. Vucic's visit was a clear message to say that Belgrade no longer supports Mr. Dodik. So I rather doubt he's going to be around for very long, frankly.
But what about this climate and rhetorics and referendum talk in Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Well, look, that is,
how dangerous is it?
Well, it's very dangerous because look, this is clearly anti-Dayton. There's no question about that. To have a unilateral referendum to dismantle an institution of the state as clearly a dress rehearsal for a further referendum on secession is manifestly anti-Dayton. Now, I want to draw the attention of those who would pursue such policies to this fact. Dayton is an international agreement which is guaranteed by the great power. The idea that Dayton could be eroded is not just important for Bosnia, it's important for the entire international community. By the way, I think the Syrian problem will be best solved by creating a Dayton-like structure for there too. So this is really important. And that means that, you know, this cannot be allowed to happen. Steps must be taken to ensure that the Dayton Agreement is protected. And anybody, I think, who makes a miscalculation that that doesn't happen, isn't going to happen, is making a miscalculation which is very dangerous indeed, for them personally and for any policy they would wish to pursue. I hope that's pretty clear. I mean, you know, we have a habit of getting ourselves obsessed by this move or that move. People will move backwards and forwards. Bosnia is a very complicated place. People will take little steps that frighten other people, but this is not a little step, this is a big step, and a very dangerous one. And the international community who created Dayton as the rock upon which peace in this country will be built has to now find the will and the strength to protect that, and my judgment is they will.
They will. Oh.
I think they will. I mean, you ask me for a prediction, for certain, but I think they will, yeah.
And what about the interpretation of the Dayton Peace Agreement? It seems like a sort of a buffet. Everybody comes to it and gets out a piece the way he or she likes.
Yeah, but it has to be taken like any piece of law whole. You can't pick and mix. You can't sort of have an a la carte Dayton. You have to have a lot. And frankly, there isn't any doubt about that. I mean, this is an international treaty guaranteed by the great powers, involving the neighbours, written down in black and white. There is no doubt about what it says. There is doubt about the will to enforce it and protect it, but there's no doubt about what it says.
Mm-hmm. And after all we said, do you think that Bosnia and Herzegovina is ready to submit its application for a candidacy status for the European Union?
That's a matter for Brussels to decide on. My own view is that it would be helpful for Bosnia to be accepted into candidate status. It's necessary but not sufficient. Nobody should, there is a sort of belief, if only we can get to candidate status, everything will naturally be all right. Oh no, it won't. Even as a candidate status, you know, then who's going to continue to invest in a dysfunctional state? Who's going to continue to invest in a state where the influence of corruption is massively too great? Who's going to want to invest in a state, provide jobs in a state which is divided and moving away from reintegration? Nobody. So candidate status by itself will not produce a future for the young people in Bosnia who are seeking jobs abroad. Bosnia has to do more than that. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Lord Ashdown, thank you very much for
Thank you very much.
this interview.